Aileen Wuornos, born February 29th, 1956, to a plant community and used as a child prostitute slash sex slave in Rochester, Michigan. Let's go over the specifics. Aileen Wuornos' mother was only 14 years old when she had Aileen with a Leo Pittman, who was a man later convicted of sex crimes against children. Aileen never met her father, who was locked up before she was born, and he hung himself in prison. When Aileen was 4 years old, her then 18-year-old mother abandoned Aileen and her brother, leaving them with her mother and father. Aileen's grandfather was an alcoholic and yet another pedophile who sexually assaulted Aileen and beat her when she was a young child. This next piece of information is a quote from a well-known website. I quote, "At the age of 11, Aileen became promiscuous at school, having sex in exchange for cigarettes and drugs," end quote. Now, I personally don't know what type of elementary school has kids willing to trade cigarettes and drugs for sex. However, we should note that at 11 years old, she was already prostituting herself. Then, for a more accurate portrayal of what was actually happening, we learned that at 13 years of age, Aileen became pregnant after being raped by her grandfather's friend. The child was given up for adoption, so her grandfather's raping her, her grandfather's quote-unquote friends are raping her, and she becomes pregnant at age 13. Then after her grandmother died, her grandfather kicks her out of the house. She was 15 at the time, and she lives in the woods nearby her house, and she supports herself as a child prostitute. So the law does not get involved when Aileen was living basically as a feral child out in the woods as a child prostitute. But they get involved in her life at the age of 18 when she gets drunk one night. She's driving around and starts shooting a .22 caliber gun out the window of the car, probably pointing it up at the sky. She was arrested. She skips out on court and she moves to Florida. Now, Florida, instead of the Sunshine State, should more accurately be known as the Plant State. If you ask my opinion, the state of Florida is just one big military operation and the home of probably the biggest snake cult in the United States. There, Aileen marries a 69-year-old yacht club owner, where they drink continuously at the local bar, and Aileen is eventually jailed for getting in a fight. At 20 years old, Aileen is back in Michigan, living on her own. She's continuing to drink at the bars, and she was jailed again for throwing a pool ball at a bartender. Then, there's 5 years where she doesn't seem to have a record. So then at the age of 25, she's jailed for robbing a convenience store for $35 and a pack of cigarettes. Then at 28 years old, she's arrested for writing forged checks. So to recap, after being born into an essentially a multi-generational incest child abuse family and then forced to live out in the woods at the age of 15, supporting herself as a child prostitute, her life of crime for the subsequent 13 years includes getting in a couple fights, robbing a gas station for $35, and writing bad checks. Then, King Kong Plant was introduced into her life, one Tyria Moore. Now, Tyria Moore bears every sign of being in the program. If you want to get an idea of how the corrupt establishment wants you to view Tyria, check out Hollywood's interpretation of these tragic events in the movie called Monster. Now, do any of you know what the real Tyria Moore looks like? want to set things clear and for the record that it's Tyria Moore who is a monster and not Aileen. It's the pathetic, multi-generational incest family that Aileen Wuornos was born into that are monsters. It's the disgusting plant community that handled her as a child prostitute that are monsters. And last, it's people like her handler, Tyria Moore, and the CIA's program who are a pack of animalistic monsters and not Aileen Wuornos. What the Vatican, CIA, military does is handle people like Aileen in mind control operations. They essentially not only implant Aileen, yet then they conduct surveillance on Aileen while putting her in different situations in a sadistic form of psychological research. Vatican CIA handlers will involve themselves directly and indirectly to force people like Aileen into different situations where she will have to react or make choices to behave in different ways. The CIA will then monitor the level of response to subliminal suggestion and situations that she'll be placed in involving plants like Tyria Moore, who will be involved directly in her life. Now, I would guess that Aileen was an intelligent and strong-willed woman who was more independent than other people. She was obviously a fighter, and it doesn't sound like she had a handler or a pimp. However, the agency could control her through these situations where she was forced to prostitute herself for money. So they made finding a job impossible for her so they could keep Aileen in the only arena which they could control. The Vatican CIA took a child victim of sex crimes who only involved herself in petty crimes until she was 30 years old and then forced her in the direction of a serial killer. They did this by making a normal life impossible for her and introducing a handler called Tyria Moore into her life. So it's the Vatican CIA program which is directly responsible for handling Aileen Wuornos' serial killer activities. Now, how does the establishment want you to understand these events? They want to sell you the lie that Aileen Wuornos is the first big-time female serial killer in American history. And it's her handler who is the innocent one. In the movie called Monster, Christina Ricci plays Tyria Moore. And Christina couldn't look more adorable, innocent, and cute in that movie. Here is Christina, this young, tiny, big-eyed Cupid doll with long dark hair and a beautiful body who lives with a good Christian family. And she hangs out, most out of place, in a gay bar, just looking for friendship and a little conversation, when in stumbles Aileen Wuornos out of the rain. As the movie goes on, you find that, surprise, surprise, little Tyria might be struggling with her sexual orientation and just might be attracted to women. And she finds the woman of her dreams to be none other than Aileen Wuornos. So let's note that Aileen Wuornos never killed anyone until she was introduced to Tyria. Here Aileen is, living out in the woods as a feral child, after getting raped by her grandfather and her grandfather's friends, and goes on to spend the next 13 years of her life as a street hooker, and her biggest crimes are getting in a couple fights, robbing a store of $35, and writing a few bad checks. And then she meets this hardcore CIA plant job named Tyria Moore, and then her life spins out of control. What do you think happened there? First, when you put Aileen and Tyria Moore together, Aileen is the cute-looking one. Aileen has long blonde hair and an athletic body. In fact, Aileen Wuornos was just plain hot during her 20s. She was beautiful. As she got older, street life and alcohol began to take its toll on her, but Aileen had been a beautiful woman. And Tyria Moore looks like the normal bull-dyke lesbian out of the agency's program. She's obese, she looks manly, huge forearms, military-style crew cut. She just plain looks manly. But look how the establishment paints her in the movie Monster, like some cute little innocent chick out of Baywatch. Next, Aileen, who has basically been heterosexual her whole life, probably never had a homosexual relationship before. But when she meets Tyria, Aileen begins to be programmed that men are to be hated because men have caused her pain throughout her whole life, while it's only going to be a woman who will really understand her, show her kindness and sympathy. So Tyria has already been programmed against men. She's been programmed especially against having any relationship with them. Tyria is a lesbian who goes out of her way to appear like a man. So as Aileen and Tyria hooked up, Aileen was shown some compassion by this woman, and it's sad because her whole life, what Aileen deserved was a normal relationship with a man, but she got one bad relationship after another as she prostituted herself to survive. So then Aileen, afraid to lose Tyria, was put into this position that in order to maintain the only compassionate relationship she's ever had, she had to come up with the money to pay the bills, to get an apartment, to support her newfound love. So Aileen tries to go out and get a regular job, and of course the program wasn't going to let her out that easy. That would defeat the whole point of what they had planned for her. So it's been documented that while Aileen was out prostituting herself to pay the bills, Tyria was always drinking the money away at the local lesbian bar with her lesbian friends, and then introducing Aileen to the whole program's lesbian counterculture. So they moved in together, where it seems Tyria no longer worked and left it all to Aileen to worry about the cost of living as Tyria partied at the bars. So from my knowledge of the CIA, Aileen and Tyria were moved into an apartment, or a series of apartments, where Aileen could be planted or easily hit with electromagnetic energy oscillators, implanted, and then coerced into violent acts. First, I'm sure they had a bunch of male plants constantly give Aileen and Tyria a hard time, instilling rage in Aileen against males. At other times, males became aggressive with them. There was a couple fights at the bars, and there was an incident where Aileen was shoved off a bus by a male bus driver. Anyway, the agency knew Aileen had aggressive tendencies and wanted to capitalize on them or groom her into being violent through a series of incidents and subliminal suggestions. So Tyria became passive-aggressive and helped groom Aileen with the rest of the agency while encouraging Aileen's violent behavior. Now, the agency is known to deploy a trick on its targets, like Aileen, which I spoke about in earlier videos, but I'm going to tell you about it again. It's called the false support. It's the way the military program creates the illusion that they are secretly on your side. This encourages the target to continue behaving as they are programmed or groomed to, while they're given this false idea that the people monitoring them support what they do, will look the other way, and possibly are looking to recruit the person, but it's part of the program's manipulation tactics. They want people like Tyria Moore to join them. They know their own. Aileen Wuornos is way too strong-willed, intelligent, and independent to be part of the CIA herd, and they knew that, so they attacked these people in mind control operations.